we should also challenge with our pens and voices the temptation to seek to choose for Palestinian people a form of government and leaders that they, in our view, should have. So you have the never Hamas coming from the West. What if that's the choice of Palestinians? Are we going to continue to shoot them because of that choice? Would we have accepted being told who should govern us in 1994? I don't think we would have accepted it. So just as we had the freedom to choose, so Palestinians must have the freedom to make their choice. And we South Africans who understand negotiation, should we be invited to play a role in this process, we should be ready to play such a role and give advice to all parties. I believe our intellectual and political contribution as South Africa might be found in supporting and steering negotiations that will help frame a just framework for freedom for Palestinians. Such active participation and interest is necessary and critical as a signal to the world that we will join together to reject harm and oppression. If we fail to act and participate, then we, the international community, because I'm not just talking about South Africans, I say this wherever I speak, because we are part of the international community. Then we, the international community, would be saying, if we fail to act, to the world, that we believe freedom and justice are for some and not for all. We'll be saying, kumnandi la, asinandaba ukuthi kwenzeka ntoni phaya. As the people and government of South Africa, I believe it is not possible for us to hold such a view. Given our history, given our still troubled context, because there's a lot we still have to do here at home, and given the legacy handed to us by President Mandela, when he said South Africa cannot be completely free if Palestinians are not free. That is our legacy. And some of us are old, so it's your legacy. We've tried to do some of what President Mandela wanted to be done, but the agenda still remains long, and you inherit that mantle. You can't be a South African and say, I know mina ndaba no Mandela, eh? I believe there's additional work for thinking academics and intellectuals. I do draw a distinction. Thinking academics and intellectuals. Because there are some who do not. So for the thinking academics and intellectuals, I wish to request, tell the full story, analyze and probe, and address those 7 elements I referred to at the start of my talk. I also ask that you focus upon and attend to defining United Nations reform and what it might mean, particularly reform of the United Nations Security Council. We have today a world in which we have a Security Council with 5 permanent members with an undemocratic veto. This body with this undemocratic veto was created when we were still colonies and administered territories. So it's not our body, and it has to be changed. Our new age mandates democratic, inclusive reform to render the United Nations responsive, effective democratically, and suited to the challenges of a new age. It is the view of South Africa that the United Nations is the premier multilateral body of our world and that we must support it to remain so while progressing with calling for reforms to the institution. So when you call for reform, you're not saying destroy it. You're saying make it more fit for purpose. So for example, in the United Nations, we're very good with peace monitoring, but we clearly have no peace enforcement capacity. So reform means build that capacity. It doesn't mean destroy peace monitoring. So we must clearly articulate what it is we mean. Change that we seek and debates and work that we do must also include decisive reform of international development finance institutions in order to ensure their ability to address the world's conundrum of inequality and poverty. How is it that we've had these Bretton Woods institutions for all these decades and we remain poor, unequal, and marginalized? There's something we need them to do and to do better. I conclude by saying it is possible for intellectuals to make a difference in the world. In fact, it's necessary for them to do so. It is, after all, you, our brightest, who enjoy access to knowledge, and you, our brightest, who have the distinctive privilege of generating new knowledge. I wish you well as you steer this university to lead in shaping a new world agenda, because essentially what I've been talking about is trying to shape a new world agenda, a world that cares, a world that respects humanity, a world that is humane, a world in which freedom and justice mean the same thing to all the inhabitants of our good earth. I thank you for allowing me to address you.
Students and colleagues who are here would realize that more of us need to learn from you, and the students in particular need to take over the vacuum that you might leave behind if you take Isitanga seriously and leave this vacuum. And nevertheless, thank you very much to all of you colleagues. Thank you, Dr. Pandor. It is really appreciated and we are grateful. Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Pandor. They say never meet your heroes, but here I am. So essentially, my question is all pertaining to the reforms of Bretton Woods institutions. I think one of the conversations that comes a lot in the IR classes that we take is the philosophical underpinnings of these institutions, because you do say that we need to introduce these reforms, but are these institutions in the first place even fit for reforms, or they within inception are they problematic, and do we need to almost find a new way of going about international cooperation that is outside of the framework of the Bretton Woods institutions? Thank you.
Very nice, Tito. When you begin, please tell us your name.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tulani Shabalala, a former Rhodes student. First, I would like to, of course, say thank you so much for this. I think, Doc, your legacy should be respected. You are one leader that should be really looked up to, and we admire you so much, and we thank you for your contribution in this country. I think I have 3 questions.
It's open to 2.
Okay, I'll try. I think 2 are related. I'll tie them together. Well, the first one is the agreement of Parliament to move or to ban, I don't know what's the appropriate word to use, the Israeli embassy from South Africa until a resolution is met. And unfortunately, that has not been done. And I think what ties to that is bring it home is the current state we're in South Africa, where the National Liberation Movement, the ANC, is in coalition with the DA, which rejects, I would say it's completely Zionist and fascist. So how do you reconcile the history of the ANC with how it's now behaving now, getting to bed with such a destructive organization that fundamentally goes against the Palestinians? And my last one will be more on the question of violence, because I think we are in this situation now because we sort of tiptoe around violence as a tactic of national liberation. Because that's why the Zionists of Israel can hold the October 7th over our heads to justify the massacre now, because we don't want to sort of firmly take a position on the usefulness of violence in national struggle. And for that reason, now we find ourselves in this difficult position whereby we have to sound like internationalists. While you know very well, Doc, your generation is the one that took up arms against the Afrikaner fascists in South Africa. So how do you sort of answer those? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll invite Dr. Pandor to respond.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the kind comments, Professor Mbata. When you mentioned the situation I'm in, I thought you were going to offer a salary for July. Thank you. On the international development finance institutions, you're absolutely correct. We do need to rethink entirely both their construct as well as their role. To some degree, it was that which led to us establishing the BRICS Bank, the New Development Bank, because we clearly realized that it is very difficult to secure funding for objectives of development that we wish to pursue. So with the BRICS Bank, you would see the loans that we have got have been for primarily public service infrastructure. And that has been the focus, and we've been able to secure those loans. And we own the institution as BRICS countries, and now the additional members that have joined the bank, because the bank is distinct from the forum. You have to commit resources to it. But also, we've begun fairly, I think, unusual discussions about use of our own currency to trade among ourselves, and hopefully even going wider. There's no decision as yet, but we are investigating this. We investigated, of course, fully alert to the fact that as governments, we have a responsibility to protect our economies as well. And so you don't become adventurist. You carry out proper research and understanding of the international finance exchange context you are dealing with, and what is possible and plausible in such a context, which will not need to harm on the bonds you hold and so on. So there are a range of factors to take into account, but we have assigned our finance ministers. I keep saying our because I'm still in the mode. We have assigned finance ministers of the BRICS countries and central bank governors to investigate this question and to report back to the next summit this year in Russia on what is plausible. So you are correct. We've begun in a modest fashion. They've begun in a modest fashion. And the finance ministers have begun looking at the composition and proportionality in the World Bank directorship. And we are putting, or have put forward, proposals on what should be changed there. Similarly, we're looking at how we deal with matters of dispute in the World Trade Organization, and how a fairer scheme might be defined, both of imposition of tariffs by particular regions or countries individually, and when these kick in and how you ameliorate impact on developing countries. So I think we're beginning to find our voice. And for me, what is really interesting about the current environment is if the South is smart, we can derive a great deal of opportunity from this moment. But only if we are smart, if we seize the moment. If we wait to see, how the powerful will react, we'll have lost the moment. I think it's the one really interesting positive feature of what's happening at the moment. The South can find itself, finally. And this is why, in terms of the court case at the ICJ, it has been largely countries of the South that are joining South Africa, with a few from the West now beginning to speak up, and we think some will continue to join. So I think, yes, look at full reconstituting, recreating, but remember that these institutions hold a great deal of our resources, as well as resources of many other member countries. So we're not going to be foolhardy in how we approach the matter, but definitely change is necessary. And I think the BRICS Bank, the NDB, is worthy of study as it matures and develops further. Gosh, Thulani, thank you very much for that kind comment. When I saw you standing up there earlier when I was going to start speaking, I thought, oh gosh. Because when I was Minister of Higher Education, when a young man had that beret, I was in trouble. So thank you very much. Well, the matter of closure of the embassy is moot, isn't it? Because Israel withdrew their ambassador once we withdrew and closed our embassy in Tel Aviv. So all that I think is needed is a decision by the new cabinet on the decision of Parliament, because it's a resolution of Parliament. It's not a decision of the government. The government would consider it and decide which way to go. I think we must continue the closure of the embassy in terms of what we said in the statement we released, which we will only consider opening when there has been sufficient progress on a negotiated solution for freedom and justice. I think that's a good position to hold, because remember that we are not anti-Israel, yeah? We are not. We're pro the people of Palestine and their just cause. And how we find a way between the two is going to be very important. For us, the primary purpose is freedom for the Palestinian people. And I think the matter of the embassy, I'm looking forward to see how the cabinet even discusses this new one, the ICJ question. I'm really looking forward to that. But I'm not a spokesperson of the ANC. They will have to speak for themselves. I suggest you invite the Secretary General and ask him how they're going to manage this interesting jigsaw puzzle. Yeah, it's a fascinating jigsaw puzzle. But the primary issue is the people of South Africa. And whatever government we have must put our people first, because there's a lot of ground that we have to make progress on. So whatever the makeup of the government, if they understand their purpose and work on that purpose, which is the people of South Africa first, I believe they would have done well for our country. But I think it's the parties that must come and answer. I'm no longer a politician. On violence, you know, I spoke in Iran on this question, and Iran was very clear in their support for Hamas, as you know. And they were dismayed when I expressed concern at the taking of hostages and the killing of several hostages. And I explained to the Iranian colleagues that, see, when we waged the struggle and when we went to armed struggles, we didn't go after civilian population. We went for military installations and apartheid installations. We're very clear. And if you read, for example, Ronnie Casserol's book on his wife Eleanor, who was one of our underground operatives, you will understand why it is we made that choice. So while indeed there were some who believe that violence is acceptable, and it's a tool of struggle for freedom. But you have to, in your different contexts, choose exactly how you will wage it. At times you may very well go after civilians, but you will suffer the consequence of a likely rejection by the popular citizenry. It sometimes results because it's very difficult to distinguish between oppressor and oppressed. And the minute you make a mistake, you've lost the ground for freedom, for the struggle. So this is why our own choice as the African National Congress was police stations, army establishments, energy sources, because we were clear that we didn't want to get into a situation where we began having to distinguish between citizenry and losing the popular support that the ANC and the liberation movements enjoyed. It was a difficult one, and sometimes I think we paid the price for it. But you know, you had the massacre in the church in Cape Town. A number of people were killed. Amy Beale, a young woman mistaken for a South African and killed right in the street. So at times, if you're not fully in a situation where you can control the execution of that armed struggle and the use of violence, you may find yourself being put on the back foot, and it could be detrimental to the progressive ambitions that you have. So it's not an easy one. You know, Colombians, the armed groups would disagree, others would agree. So it depends really on context. But I think how you execute it and your ability to maintain the most popular support, particularly of those who are oppressed. You never wish to have a situation such as, have you watched the film Gandhi? Such as occurred when there was that uprising and there was a report to Mahatma Gandhi that no, the people have now ended the uprising, and in fact I saw some kid kissing a British soldier, and he said, "Oh God, I didn't mean we should go that far." That's what you need to avoid. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I would like to sneak in just two burning questions. It's now or never. Yes. Okay, yes. Okay. Okay, I'll sneak in three. Okay. Please remind me your name. Gotulo, then Tulisa, right? Okay, and then at the back.
Good afternoon, good evening, sorry. Dr. Pandor, thank you for your address. And I particularly have a question on the use of violence and how you say that we can approach it if we properly take a way that we can execute it, not showing that we are anti-Israel and not attacking civilians, but rather heads of the Israel army and armed groups. So we understand that the United Nations condemns violence unless it is in self-defense. And right now, Palestine is not in a state where they can actually execute self-defense. Can we then, not through a multipolarity approach, say that we are using violence against those armed groups to show that we are helping them within their self-defense if we are trying to show our collaboration with Palestine?
Trying to get a microphone to Tunisia.
Good afternoon. So I just wanted to ask, you spoke about justice and freedom for all and international solidarity. So I'd like to inquire about the South Africans' foreign policy approach in two specific regions, being Ukraine and Palestine. I understand that South Africa took a neutral stance in Russia and Ukraine as it aligns with the country's values and interests. And secondly, South Africa has also been very vocal in support of Palestine, and I understand the rationale on the stance based on South Africa's apartheid legacy and its commitment to human rights and self-determination. So what I'm really interested in knowing right now, in understanding right now, is the thinking behind this seemingly different approaches and how they reflect South Africa's broader foreign policy, and if maybe country put like people before politics.
Please go ahead and tell us your name. We can hardly hear you, Mpo.
Thank you very much, Prof. And greetings, former Minister. My name is Mpo, and my question it's based on how the judges are going to adjudicate themselves now that you're asking the question of genocide. Obviously, we have seen a lot of relations in countries, and there has been debates that rather that decisions that are going to be made, or rather the decision that is going to be made that this case is actually a genocide, is going to be politically influenced, right? In the case that we had, I guess the ICJ case, the question was whether there was a plausible case on merits. And, well, obviously it was found so, but now, yeah, the question has been raised as to take into consideration that we're now in bed with the DA and also the PA, who have said that they are just pro-Israel, and as Tulani has said, look into consideration as well as the US, with now that elections are going, and also in UK that now just a new president is elected. Do you think those political forces, external forces, are going to have some sort of like an influence in the case that we have to declare what is going there as a genocide, rather than just a ceasefire that we just won a few months back? Thank you.
Might recall was not referred to by the prosecutor of the ICC when he mentioned the reasons for seeking a warrant against Netanyahu and the defense minister and the other. There are three that he's asked the court to issue. And I was worried that he didn't mention occupation nor the right to resist, which is in the United Nations Charter. I don't know in what manner South Africa would offer armed support to Palestine because we are a state, a member state of the United Nations, and there are particular obligations we have to uphold. We can't help to generate a war situation. We are, in a sense, using violence through support of Mozambique against the extremist forces in Cabo Delgado, or DRC in the support against the M23 rebels and the other rebel groups in that region, because these groups are attacking civilians and they pose a threat to our own security as part of Southern Africa. But I think we'd have a hard sell to say that we would provide some form of armed support to the Palestinian people against Israelis. Primarily, I think the challenge that you confront is, as I said, the complexity of the issue it is an issue that divides the world quite sharply and is also able to be utilized as a quasi anti-religious sentiment and anti-Jewish faith sentiment. You know that there's been a great deal of impunity granted to Israel since the advent of the Holocaust in the Second World War. This impunity has resulted almost in a moral fear to be upright in challenging Israel when it does the wrong thing, because you get the response that if you stand up for Palestinians against Israelis, you are then standing against Jewish people who suffered this massive horror of the Holocaust. And it's a manner of shaping the discourse that has unfortunately gone on for more than second decades and has captured a lot of popular imagination. For example, a large part of our society doesn't agree with government taking the ICJ case on because they believe that there's a religious status that Israel enjoys among Christian people. And the Israel they think of when they see what's happening is not the Israel that is occupying, that is killing, that is detaining. It's the Israel described in the Old Testament. And this is a real problem that we have to engage on rather. We've been speaking to religious leaders who've begun to unravel these myths in the setting of religious institutions, so that people understand that this is not the Israel of Moses. It's something else that we're dealing with. It's a cruelty which the world cannot tolerate. But I'm going roundabout in answering your question because I'm really trying to say you're dealing with an extremely complex issue. And I think it's not a resort to one solution that will address it. It's a multiplicity of approaches that would have to come into play, including, I think, a negotiation, as well as something I didn't refer to, which is the unifying of the different factions in Palestine. When we engaged them in the early 60s through our leaders, it was easier because you had Fatah as the primary organ and freedom fighter. Today you have a multiplicity of factions, some of which have come out of Fatah, you know, like organizations we see today, which have come out of the ANC. If you were to face a national crisis in South Africa and have that multiplicity of forces, all pushing in different directions, and yet all oppressed, it would make life and finding a solution extremely difficult. So one of the things we have been promoting is that the factions must begin to talk. And I'm really glad that Russia is playing a role in this, as is China. The more difficult question is the Ukraine one. You see, one of the things I've never really liked much in debate is when you sort of have an attraction of what are termed opposites, you know? So I mentioned Palestine, you mentioned Ukraine. So my colleagues before, previous colleagues, would do that to me. And I would say to them, you know what? My country will come out solidly in support of Ukraine if NATO arms Palestine. They're not dealing with equals here. Very different situations, and it's important that we appreciate that. Secondly, we are not neutral about Ukraine. We, from day one, said this conflict can only be solved by negotiation. And we indicated we are ready to play a role. And we even went to Ukraine and Russia to persuade both of them. Both countries' leaders believe they can win this war. We believe it can't be won. We believe that they have to sit around a table and negotiate. We've continued to engage both of them. We went to the Ukraine so-called peace summit, which was really about Ukraine's peace proposal, and consistently we've been saying to Ukraine, you can only really have discussions about peace when Russia is in the same room with you. And we are ready to help facilitate that. So we're not neutral, but we don't support the armed conflict between the two. And we're not arming anyone. With respect to Palestine, our support is very clear. We are supporting those suffering harm and oppression. On the ICJ and influences, well, Mpo, I would have thought as you are thinking, if we didn't have that first judgment on provisional measures. To be honest with you, when I looked at those 17 judges, I was totally hopeless. I wished I wasn't in The Hague. And it's only when they got to the second paragraph of the order that I realized we had something revolutionary happening here. Because by the second order, the second paragraph, when they said it's plausible that genocide is being committed, I knew something different was happening. And they come from all different regions of the world. But 15 of the 17 agreed on all the orders. And it was just our African judge, and the other was the Israeli judge. The judge from Israel, a former prime minister, agreed on one of the measures, and the Ugandan judge rejected everything. Very, very odd. So indeed there may be influences, but I believe in responding to our cases thus far, there has been a genuine engagement with the legal issues, which is their responsibility. What worries us still is that issue of enforcement, of action on the measures. And that is something all of us as UN member states have to reflect upon much more. But one thing we've done as South Africa, by going to the ICJ, we have put these issues in the public domain more openly than they've ever been put in the public domain before. And this is an important step forward. Plus, we have a court order saying it is plausible that genocide is being committed. These are important decisions. So we shouldn't undermine because it doesn't go all the way that we wish to go. We shouldn't undermine the importance of the step that we've taken as South Africans, and the fact that a country that enjoyed massive impunity as though it was the most innocent state in the world is now exposed in its horrible dimensions for all the world to see, and it is South Africa that did that. I think that's very important. Well, as a revolutionary and as an academic, I'm sure, you know that part of the role you have to play is one of persuasion, right? So you have DA and PA thinking something. Your role is to make them change, right? By persuasion, by engagement, by whatever means, right? That's the opportunity that exists now. So let's see what's going to happen in that room where they are on their own. And if they emerge with a different approach to that which we expect progressive forces to have, you know what to do, right? So that's all I'll say. On the United Kingdom, we have a different government. In the UK, And we are waiting to hear their view on this conflict, which their government previous has been such a very strong part of. On the French elections, with the left winning with the center, already they've announced that they will recognize the state of Palestine when the vote is up in the United Nations. So there are shifts happening, but we've got to encourage even greater shifts. This means we, the forces of the left, must not be tired of engaging all forces all over the world to ensure that we begin to seize the ground from the right, which is actively mobilizing to change the world into something really horrible. So there's work for all of us to do if we believe in progressive ideals. If we don't, we're going to suffer the consequences. So there's work that we must do, and that work requires all of us to be social actors. Nobody should hide behind a corner and say, I'm not political, I'm not this. Next thing, you'll be oppressed and you'll be blaming someone else. So part of your task is to be active, to be aware, to be knowledgeable, and to engage with the rest of the world. Don't sit in a corner. Be there. Thank you.